I've always been a night driver. Something about the empty roads and the quiet hum of my engine made me feel at peace. No traffic, no honking, just the open road and my thoughts. But one night changed that for me forever. I don't drive at night anymore. I can't. Not after what I saw on Highway 46. It was a late October evening, crisp and cold. I was heading back to my hometown after visiting a friend who lived 2 states over. The trip should have taken me about 5 hours, but I'd left later than I'd planned and was now facing an overnight drive. The first few hours passed uneventfully. The interstate was quiet, with the occasional truck rumbling past. But somewhere around 1 a.m., my GPS suggested an alternate route, a supposed shortcut through a more rural area. I hesitated, but it shaved nearly 40 minutes off my trip, and I was eager to get home. I took the exit, merging onto Highway 46. It was a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. At first, Highway 46 seemed like any other backroad, 2 narrow lanes flanked by endless fields. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the landscape. There were no streetlights, no signs, and no other cars. Just me and the long, winding road. I kept driving, but after about 20 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. The road seemed darker here, the shadows deeper, as if the moonlight couldn't quite reach this part of the world. My headlights barely illuminated the asphalt ahead, and the fields on either side of me felt impossibly vast, stretching into an endless black void. My unease grew when I noticed the first sign. It was a small wooden post on the side of the road, with a hand-painted message in faded red letters. Last stop, 15 miles. It didn't make any sense. What did last stop mean? Was it a gas station? A town? I hadn't seen a single building or even a driveway since I'd turned onto the highway. I told myself it was nothing to worry about and kept driving. But the farther I went, the stranger things became. About 10 minutes later, my headlights caught something up ahead, a car parked on the shoulder. It was an old sedan, rusted and beaten, with its hazard lights blinking faintly. I slowed down as I approached, craning my neck to look for someone. The driver's door was open, but there was no one inside. Something about the car felt wrong. The air around it seemed colder, heavier, and as I rolled past, I swore I saw faint handprints smeared across the fogged-up windows. I considered stopping to check if someone needed help, but my gut told me to keep going. As I sped up, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The car was gone. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no intersections, no signs, and no end in sight. My GPS had stopped working entirely, its screen frozen on a blank map. I was completely alone, surrounded by nothing but darkness. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, just barely audible over the hum of my engine. At first, I thought it was static from the radio, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were coming from behind me. I turned my head briefly to look, but the back seat was empty. The whispers didn't stop, though. They were overlapping now, a chaotic murmur of voices I couldn't understand. "Turn back," one voice hissed. "You don't belong here," another growled. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to drown out the voices by turning up the music, but my stereo only emitted static. That's when I saw the second sign. Last stop, 5 miles. The paint was fresher on this one, the letters stark red against the wood. It looked newer, like it had been placed there recently. I didn't stop to think about it. I just kept driving. A few minutes later, I spotted something else up ahead. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A man was standing in the middle of the road, his back to me, swaying slightly. His clothes were tattered, his frame gaunt. I slowed down, my headlights washing over him. He didn't turn around. "Hey!" I called, rolling down my window slightly. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. I honked my horn, but he didn't move. Frustrated, I veered into the opposite lane to go around him. As I passed, I glanced out my window and froze. His head had turned to follow me, but his body hadn't moved. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes completely black. I floored the gas pedal, my heart racing. For the next few miles, I kept seeing them. Figures standing on the side of the road, their faces obscured by shadows. Some were children, others adults, but they all had the same vacant, black eyes. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as I drove past. Finally, I saw it. A gas station up ahead, its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. Last stop, the sign read in bold red letters. The station looked old and run down, but I didn't care. My gas tank was nearly empty, and I was desperate to get off this road. I pulled into the lot, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. The station was eerily quiet, the air thick and heavy. The only light came from the flickering neon sign and a single bulb above the entrance. I got out of the car, glancing around nervously. The windows of the station were covered in grime, and the pumps looked ancient, their nozzles rusted. I walked to the door and pushed it open. A bell jingled weakly, but no one was inside. The shelves were mostly empty, lined with dusty cans and expired snacks. "Hello?" I called. No response. I turned to leave, but then I noticed something on the counter, a map. It was hand-drawn, scrawled on a piece of yellowed paper. The map showed Highway 46, winding through a series of dark forests and empty fields. At the end of the road was a large X, circled in red ink. Beneath the X were 3 words: "Do not enter." As I stared at the map, I heard it, the low rumble of an engine outside. I rushed to the window and peered out. A black car was parked next to mine, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. The engine was running, but no one got out. I stood frozen, my breath fogging up the glass. The car's headlights flicked on, flooding the station with harsh white light. That's when I saw them, the figures. They were standing at the edge of the lot, dozens of them, their hollow eyes glinting in the light. The black car's engine revved, and I knew I had to leave. I sprinted back to my car, fumbling with my keys as the figures began to move closer. They didn't walk, they glided, their feet never touching the ground. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and peeled out of the lot. The black car followed. I drove as fast as I could, my heart pounding. The black car stayed on my tail, its headlights blinding me in my mirrors. The figures lined the sides of the road now, their faces turned toward me as I sped past. The whispers had returned, louder this time, overlapping into a deafening roar. Finally I saw it, a sign up ahead. Exit 46 to 1 mile. I gripped the wheel and pushed the gas pedal to the floor. The black car swerved, trying to cut me off, but I held my ground. When I reached the exit, I veered onto it without slowing down. The black car didn't follow. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town. I pulled into a brightly lit diner, shaking as I stumbled inside. The waitress looked at me with concern. "Honey, are you okay?" "I was on Highway 46, I stammered. Her face went pale. "Highway 46, she repeated. "That road's been closed for years. No one's driven it since." She trailed off, but I didn't press her. I didn't want to know. To this day, I don't know what happened on that road. I've tried to find information about Highway 46, but there's nothing. No maps, no records, not even rumors. All I know is that I'll never drive it again. And if you ever find yourself on a dark, desolate highway, and you see a sign that says "Last Stop," don't take it. Keep driving. It was supposed to be a straightforward trip, a 400-mile drive from my small hometown in Kansas to the bustling city of Oklahoma City, where I was starting a new job. I was excited, a little nervous, but mostly eager to leave the quiet monotony of my old life behind. I'd packed everything into my beat-up Toyota Corolla, my clothes, books, and the essentials for starting fresh. The drive should have taken about 7 hours, but by the time I reached my destination, I was forever changed. That stretch of highway, Route 23, was not just any road. It was cursed. I left at 8 a.m. on a clear Friday morning. The sun was shining, my playlist was queued up, and I had a full tank of gas. The first leg of the trip was uneventful: cornfields, the occasional farm, and long stretches of flat, open road. Around noon, I stopped at a roadside diner for lunch. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, seemed genuinely surprised to see me. "Where you headed?" she asked as she refilled my coffee. "Oklahoma City," I said, smiling. "Starting a new job." Her face darkened slightly. "Taking Route 23? "Yeah, why?" She hesitated, her hand gripping the coffee pot a little tighter. "Just stick to the main highway. People get lost on that road." I laughed nervously. "Well, I've got GPS, so I should be fine." She didn't laugh. Instead, she just gave me a look, part pity, part warning, and walked away. I brushed it off. After all, it was just a road. About an hour later, my GPS pinged with a reroute notification. The main highway was backed up due to an accident, but the app suggested an alternate route, Route 23. It would shave 45 minutes off my drive. I remembered the waitress's warning. but I wasn't superstitious, and I didn't want to sit in traffic for hours. So, I took the turnoff and merged onto Route 23. At first, the road seemed fine. It was quiet, eerily so. No other cars, no buildings, just an endless stretch of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of dense forest. The trees on either side of the road loomed tall and dark, their branches intertwining overhead to form a tunnel that blocked out most of the sunlight. The farther I drove, the more unsettling it became. The GPS showed nothing but a straight line for miles, and there were no mile markers, signs, or landmarks. It felt like I was driving through the same stretch of road over and over again. I'd been driving for about an hour when I noticed something odd. A black pickup truck parked on the shoulder. Its driver's side door was open, but there was no one inside. I slowed down, glancing at the truck as I passed. It looked old and rusted, like it had been sitting there for years. But the strangest part was the license plate. It was completely blank. No numbers, no letters, just a smooth, featureless metal plate. I sped up, telling myself it wasn't my business. A few miles later, I saw another vehicle, an old station wagon. This one flipped onto its side. Its windows were shattered, and its body was covered in deep scratches like claw marks. I didn't stop. By now, my unease had turned to outright dread. The road seemed endless, with no intersections, no exits, and no signs of life. My phone had lost signal hours ago, and my GPS screen was stuck on recalculating. That's when I saw him. A man was standing on the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal hitchhiker gesture. He was tall and gaunt, with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he had a strange, jerky way of moving, like he wasn't entirely in control of his body. I swerved to avoid him, but as I passed, I swear I saw his head turn to follow me, his blank eyes staring right into mine. When I glanced in my rearview mirror, he was gone. Panic was starting to set in. I kept driving, hoping I'd eventually reach an exit or a gas station, but the road never changed. It was the same stretch of cracked asphalt, the same looming trees, the same oppressive silence. After what felt like hours, I saw something up ahead, a black pickup truck parked on the shoulder. At first, I thought it was another abandoned vehicle, but as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was the same truck I'd seen earlier. The driver's side door was still open, and the blank license plate glinted in the dim light. I drove past it, my hands trembling on the wheel. A few miles later, I saw the flipped station wagon. The same claw marks, the same shattered windows. I was going in circles. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the road. I was running low on gas, and the fear of being stranded on this cursed highway was becoming unbearable. That's when I heard them, the voices. At first, it was just a faint whisper, barely audible over the hum of the engine. But as the minutes passed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were coming from the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting behind me. But the back seat was empty. Still, the voices persisted, overlapping in a cacophony of murmurs. Some were angry, others pleading, but none of them made any sense. "Turn around. You shouldn't be here. He's coming." The sun had disappeared completely, leaving me in total darkness. My headlights barely pierced the gloom, and the trees seemed to close in tighter around the road. I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white, my eyes darting from the road to the rearview mirror and back again. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was the hitchhiker, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood dozens of shadowy figures, their forms barely visible in the dim light. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there blocking the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. The car skidded to a stop just a few feet from the figures. The hitchhiker stepped forward, his jerky movements more pronounced now. He raised one hand and pointed at me, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. I threw the car into reverse and slammed on the gas, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, they were there too, the same shadowy figures, standing silently behind me. I don't know how I managed to keep driving. My hands were shaking, and I could barely see through the tears streaming down my face. The voices in the back seat had grown louder, overlapping into a deafening roar. My gas gauge was on empty, the needle dipping below the red line. Just when I thought I couldn't go any farther, I saw it, a sign. It was old and rusted, barely legible in the dim light. As I got closer, I made out the words, "Exit 23, 1 mile." Relief flooded through me. I pressed down on the gas pedal, praying I had enough fuel to make it. The voices grew more frantic, screaming at me to stop. The shadowy figures appeared on either side of the road, their forms flickering like static. The hitchhiker was back, running alongside the car, his empty eyes fixed on mine. But I didn't stop. When I finally reached the exit, the car sputtered and died, coasting to a stop just past the turnoff. I stumbled out, gasping for air. The road ahead was brightly lit, with street lights and the faint glow of a distant town. Behind me, Route 23 stretched into the darkness, the shadowy figures now frozen at the edge of the light. I didn't look back. I walked the rest of the way to the town, where I found a gas station and called for help. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a kind face, seemed genuinely surprised to see me. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Route 23, I said, my voice trembling. His expression darkened. "That road's been closed for years. No one drives it anymore." I didn't argue. It's been 3 years since that night, but I still have nightmares about Route 23. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear the voices again. I've tried researching the highway, but there's almost nothing about. It was supposed to be an easy trip, just me, my old Honda Civic, and a long stretch of empty highway. I was driving from Denver to a small town in Nevada to visit my brother, taking a route I'd never driven before. It was the middle of nowhere, but I didn't mind. I actually liked the isolation. It gave me time to think. But there's something about those endless, desolate highways. Something unnatural. They're too quiet, too still, like they're waiting for you to notice that you're completely alone. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was already too late. I started my trip in the late afternoon, figuring I'd drive through the night and get to Nevada by morning. The first few hours were uneventful. Flat stretches of road, the occasional gas station, and miles of barren desert. Around 10 p.m., I missed an exit. I didn't think much of it at first. My GPS rerouted me onto an alternate highway. This new road was narrower, darker, with no streetlights or signs of civilization. The GPS said it would only add about 30 minutes to my trip, so I kept going. But after an hour of driving, I still hadn't seen another car, let alone a town. The GPS started glitching, its screen freezing and rerouting me again and again. Eventually, it just went blank. I told myself I'd hit another highway soon. The road had to lead somewhere, right? Around midnight, I saw a dim light in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized it was a gas station. I pulled in, noticing how eerily quiet it was. The place looked abandoned. The overhead lights flickered, and the gas pumps were old, the kind with spinning dials instead of digital screens. I got out of the car and called out, "Hello?" No one answered. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. I went inside the convenience store, hoping to find someone who could point me in the right direction. The shelves were mostly empty, stocked with dusty cans and expired snacks. The air smelled stale, like the place hadn't been opened in years. That's when I noticed the cashier. He was standing behind the counter, perfectly still, staring straight ahead. He didn't blink or move, just stood there with a vacant expression. "Hey," I said cautiously, "I'm lost. Can you tell me how to get back to the main highway?" He didn't respond. I took a step closer, and that's when I realized something was very wrong. His eyes weren't just vacant, they were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just two dark, empty sockets. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and bolted out of the store. As I jumped into my car and sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cashier was standing in the doorway, watching me. I drove for what felt like hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The gas station had shaken me, but I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe I was just exhausted and imagining things. Around 3 a.m., a thick fog rolled in, so dense I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no turns, no landmarks, nothing but the white lines on the asphalt. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from the figure. My heart was pounding as I fumbled to turn on my high beams. The figure was a man, dressed in ragged clothes, his face pale and hollow. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there staring at me. I rolled down the window slightly, just enough to yell, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his arm and pointed down the road. I couldn't explain why, but a cold wave of dread washed over me. Something about the way he moved, the emptiness in his expression, it wasn't right. I swerved around him and kept driving, my eyes glued to the road. But the farther I went, the more figures I began to see. They were all the same, pale, hollow, standing perfectly still on the side of the road, watching as I passed. After what felt like an eternity, I saw headlights in the distance. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone anymore. I flashed my high beams, signaling the other car. As it got closer, my stomach dropped. It was my car. The same make, the same model, the same dent on the front bumper. And the driver was me. I stared in disbelief as the other car sped past me, disappearing into the fog. I slammed on the brakes, my mind racing. Was I hallucinating? Dreaming? I checked my phone, but it was dead. The clock on the dashboard blinked 3 a.m., frozen on the same time it had been for hours. I kept driving, hoping, praying that I'd find a way out. But the road never changed. It just stretched on endlessly, with the same pale figures, the same suffocating fog. At some point, I saw a sign up ahead. It was old and rusted, barely legible. As I got closer, I made out the words, "End of the road." The pavement abruptly ended, giving way to a steep drop into darkness. I slammed on the brakes and got out of the car, peering over the edge. There was nothing below, just an endless void. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned to see the pale figures closing in, their black eyes locked on me. And then I saw him, the man from the gas station. He was standing among them, a twisted smile on his face. "You shouldn't have come this way," he said, his voice low and guttural. Before I could respond, the ground beneath me crumbled, and I fell into the void. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body bruised and battered. A trucker had found my car flipped over in a ditch, miles from any road or highway. They said I must have fallen asleep at the wheel and hallucinated everything. But I know what I saw. To this day, I avoid long drives at night. There's something out there on those empty highways, something waiting for people like me, who stray too far from the beaten path. And sometimes, if I close my eyes, I can still see them. The pale figures, the fog, the black eyes watching me from the shadows. I'll never drive that road again.